Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 crazy things done by Egyptian pharaohs. Like many rulers from the time before we had running water and microwaves, the pharaohs of Egypt were considered to be only rivaled in power by the gods their people worshipped. Considering the ancient Egyptians worshipped a god with a crocodile for a head, they must have thought their pharaohs were pretty boss. So boss, in fact, that they let them get away with some pretty ridiculous things during their time in power. For example, let's talk about that one time. Number 10. Pharaoh Psamtik III let his army be defeated to save some cats. As you may recall from the Mummy movies, cats were kind of a big deal in ancient Egypt. This is mostly due to the animal being closely linked with the cat-headed goddess of warfare and balls of twine, Bastet. In addition, cats were revered for the role they played in protecting food stores and homes from disease by killing pests like snakes and rats. As a result, it was considered a crime in ancient Egypt to harm, or through inaction, allow a cat to come to harm. Basically, the pharaohs coined the 3 laws of robotics before Asimov and used them to protect the thing that poops under your stairs. Perhaps the greatest example of a pharaoh placing the well-being of cats above that of his own people was when Pharaoh Psamtik III literally told his army not to fight because an enemy commander had released hundreds of cats onto the battlefield. That commander was Persian King Cambyses II, who, knowing of the Egyptians' love of cats, had his men collect as many as they could prior to the battle and ordered them to simply walk up to the front gate of Pelusium, a major Egyptian stronghold, holding them, along with releasing hundreds more into the enemy ranks as they advanced. The Egyptians, under threat of death from their pharaoh, had no choice but to let Cambyses' men walk straight into the city unchecked. Cambyses' men then slaughtered anyone who dared to challenge them, using shields with cats drawn on them because, oh yeah, even striking an image of a cat in ancient Egypt was enough to get into trouble. The end result was a total victory for Cambyses, who celebrated in a dignified and noble fashion. Just kidding, he ordered the defeated Egyptian army to march past him as he threw cats at them while screaming insults at their god. Luckily for Psamtik, this was by no means the most embarrassing thing to happen to a pharaoh, with that honor likely belonging to Number 9. Pharaoh Menes, the legendary pharaoh who was killed by an angry hippo. Pharaoh Menes, sometimes written as Mena or simply Min, was reportedly Egypt's first pharaoh, and his journey to unify all of Egypt under a single ruler is the stuff of legends. Not because it was awesome, but because we know virtually nothing about Menes's life or rule. He's just from that long ago. In fact, historians are only really confident about a few key details from Menes's life: that he ruled Egypt during a time of relative peace, that he was well respected by his people, and that he was stomped to death by a hippo after 62 years on the throne. Exactly how Menes met his end at the hands of a hippo isn't known, because apparently that's not a detail that anyone felt would be interesting to note. All we know for sure is that somehow the first Egyptian pharaoh was mysteriously ambushed while surrounded by guards by a hippo. Speaking of dead pharaohs though, did you know? Number 8. Pharaoh Rameses got a passport long after he was dead. Rameses II is considered to have been one of ancient Egypt's greatest rulers. We're judging this just by how many monuments were built in his name and the fact that he was alternatively known as Rameses the Great. After 96 years as a pharaoh, Rameses was probably looking forward to spending some quality time alone as a corpse in a pimping gold coffin, but the museums of the world, well, they had other ideas. Like many great pharaohs, Rameses' corpse was exhumed and put on display in a museum. His near-century-long legacy as a man thought of as no less than a god, summed up by a single placard in a language his ancient mind couldn't comprehend. In 1974, after years on display, Rameses' corpse was showing its age, and it was agreed that it should be sent to a Paris laboratory to be prettied up. Not wanting the memory of one of the greatest pharaohs to be sullied by listing him as luggage, the Egyptian government granted Rameses an official Egyptian passport for his journey. Along with listing his name and age, some 3,000 years at the time he flew, the passport also listed Ramesses' occupation as king, with a small disclaimer adding that he was dead, as if the fact that he was 3,000 years old didn't already give that away. Number 7. Pharaoh Sesostris and her big old vagina statues. Pharaoh Sesostris is a pharaoh who may or may not have existed, with modern historians believing that he may actually be a composite figure, with the stories told about him being gleaned from the lives of several pharaohs from across Egypt's history. These pharaohs include the aforementioned Rameses the Great and Seti I. As a result, we don't know exactly who the following story is actually attributed to, but we had to share it anyway because, well, you'll see in a minute. So the story goes that Sesostris was an incredibly confident military leader who hungered for battle, openly mocking enemies he felt fought poorly and applauding those he felt fought with honor. To this end, the pharaoh is said to have taken to erecting statues in the middle of conquered cities that he didn't feel put up much of a fight. These statues would have a giant's vagina carved into it. This was a symbolic insult that suggested that the conquered city's army fought like women. But put yourself in our shoes and tell us you wouldn't at least mention a pharaoh with a penchant for erecting giant vagina statues as an insult. Number 6. Pharaoh Akhenaten got rid of religion, so Egypt got rid of him. Akhenaten is a pharaoh notable for two things: attempting to introduce monotheism to ancient Egypt and the resulting backlash that saw him nearly erased from all of history. Basically, Akhenaten attempted to abandon the traditional Egyptian religious beliefs of believing in multiple awesome gods and instead tried to convince his people to believe in and worship a single supergod called Aten. Perhaps because Aten was a lame disc of light with dozens of arms instead of a cool crocodile man or a dog-headed grim reaper, the people of Egypt largely rejected this new religion, and mere days after Akhenaten died, every reference to Aten, and by extension Akhenaten, who styled himself as Aten's representative on Earth like some sort of sun pope, was scrubbed from Egypt. Everything from the vast temples the pharaoh built to simple cooking pots bearing an image of Aten were destroyed, and Akhenaten himself was branded a traitor, with every mention of his rule being erased from every historical record. So complete was this process that modern scholars had no idea Akhenaten had even existed until the late 19th century, when some of the items that survived the purge of his new religion were discovered. Number 5. Many pharaohs ceremonially masturbated into the Nile. Whacking it, which is the proper scientific term, played a surprisingly big part in ancient Egyptian culture, with the society's creation story literally involving one of their many gods masturbating into the cosmos to create life as we know it. As pharaohs were seen as being basically a single step below the various deities of ancient Egypt, it was similarly customary for pharaohs to polish their bone and shoot some baby gravy directly into the Nile every now and again. The idea behind this bizarre practice was that, like the gods before them, the pharaoh was infusing the river with his holy seed, encouraging life to spring forth from its waters in the form of a good harvest. Of course, not every pharaoh did this, because not every pharaoh had a tallywhacker, which didn't stop them pretending they did though. Just ask. Number 4. Pharaoh Hatshepsut and her big fake beard. While the image of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh is undeniably that of a rippling, golden-skinned man with a crooked staff, a silly hat, and a stupid beard, Egypt did have its fair share of vagina-owning pharaohs. Among them was Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most celebrated rulers and a woman credited with one of the longest and most successful reigns of any ruler from history, female or otherwise. Along with establishing trade routes that helped fill Egyptian coffers with gold and various spices, Hatshepsut is also credited with inventing that killer eyeliner that all of the pharaohs wore. History notes that Hatshepsut's gender was seldom an issue for her subjects, and many statues were built in her honor, sporting her delicate features, and oddly enough, a big beard. You see, in ancient Egypt, that weird beard thing was seen as a symbol of power, and all pharaohs, male and female, were expected to have one during special ceremonies. The problem for Hatshepsut, other female pharaohs, and even male pharaohs who couldn't grow a half-decent beard, is that this obviously wasn't possible. As such, elaborate fake beards were constructed to be used by pharaohs who, for whatever reason, didn't like the idea of actually growing and maintaining a real one. Hatshepsut went a step further than this, though, and she's recorded as having ordered that all statues of her were to capture her likeness, while also simultaneously depicting her as a man to silence any naysayers who believed she couldn't rule because of her gender. As a result of this, Hatshepsut statues are a curiosity among historians, as they clearly depict her with female facial features but a buff man's body and a beard. Number 3. Pharaoh Cleopatra once had herself delivered naked in a carpet. Cleopatra, like Hatshepsut, was one of Egypt's celebrated female rulers. However, unlike the former, who went out of her way to appear as a man, Cleopatra was famous for using her womanly wiles to get her own way. This is no better summed up by the story of how she got Julius Caesar into bed. The story goes that Cleopatra, who was renowned across the ancient world for being both beautiful and exceptionally cunning, sought to secure Caesar's assistance in bolstering her political power during a diplomatic visit by the Roman ruler. Seeing as at the time they met, Caesar was a 52-year-old man and she was a nubile 20-year-old, Cleopatra realized the best way to do this would probably be with her vagina. To absolutely ensure that Caesar would have no chance to spurn her advances, she stripped completely naked and had several slaves roll her up in a giant carpet, some sources say bed sheets, which she then asked to be delivered to Caesar as a gift. The slaves knocked on Caesar's door, told him they had a present for him, then unrolled the fabric towards the foot of his bed, revealing a naked Cleopatra, who then invited him to have some sex. The resulting love affair between Caesar and Cleopatra formed one of the ancient world's most influential power couples, and it started with a sex move straight out of Barney Stinson's playbook. Number 2. Pharaoh Pepi II and his honey-covered slaves. Pharaoh Pepi II was a fairly unremarkable pharaoh, all things considered. Sure, he ruled Egypt and probably did the five-knuckle shuffle into the Nile a few times, but he was mostly content during his rule to gorge himself on food and chill with Ra by bathing shirtless beneath the burning Egyptian sun. Pepi, however, had a particular dislike of flies, in particular when he was trying to eat, which was an issue because Pepi was always stuffing his face. To counter this problem, King Pepi had a designated slave in his sizable entourage covered in honey every single day. This slave would inevitably attract the flies, who'd become stuck to the honey and thus unable to bother Pepi while he ate. This worked so well that Pepi eventually had a honey-covered slave stand in every room of his palace so that he'd never again be bothered by flies. This thus proved that even the most minor annoyances can be totally avoided provided you're rich and powerful enough and also have an army of slaves willing to be dipped in honey. Number 1. Pharaoh Tutankhamun had a dagger from space. We're not going to insult anyone who got this far in the video by describing who Tutankhamun is, so we're just going to get right to the point and say that he had a knife from space. Specifically, Tutankhamun had a small dagger experts believed was formed from iron found in a meteorite. Found in the Pharaoh's tomb in the 1920s, the dagger, despite being thousands of years old, is still sharp enough today that TSA wouldn't let you on board a plane with it. But here's the thing, nobody is really sure where the dagger came from because historical evidence suggests that the ancient Egyptians weren't suitably advanced enough to smelt iron, let alone forge a weapon using space metal. This has led historians to presume that the dagger was a gift from a foreign nation who did possess that technology. While historians are pretty confident that the foreign nation wasn't the Martians, they haven't explicitly ruled it out either, so we guess that ancient alien guy, well, maybe he has a point. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also over there on the right, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.